Miyamoto Musashi carved the void with his blade. Mehmed the Conqueror reshaped geography with his will. One sought perfection in the silence of 60 duels. The other shattered the walls of a millennium-old empire with mathematical fury. In this video, we witness how the strategic genius of Miyamoto Musashi and Sultan Mehmed II merge into a single absolute will. Times and tools change, but the art of bending reality remains the same. Lock your eyes on the screen. This is not a history lesson. This is a blueprint on how to demolish the walls in your mind and move like a ghost through the impossible. Musashi and Mehmed. 2 different centuries, 2 different worlds, one singular truth. Strategy is the art of bending reality. Will and cut. The calluses on Musashi's hands were forged in the mud of Sekigahara and the clotted blood of the fallen. At 13, when he floored Arima Kihei, he realized the sword was not just metal, it was an extension of the soul. In the mountains, where starvation and freezing winds bit into his bones, he didn't just learn to survive. He learned to transcend survival. Simultaneously, in the cold marble corridors of the Edirne Palace, a 12-year-old boy felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. When his father left him the throne, Mehmed II fought more than just uncertainty. He fought the wolves surrounding him. The patronizing stares of the pashas, the mocking laughter of Europe, the label of the child sultan. Mehmed turned every one of those stares into a whetstone. He stayed awake over Latin, Greek, and Persian texts. His eyes were bloodshot from ballistic calculations, his mind besieged by the walls of Rome. While Musashi was disciplined by hunger on the mountain, Mehmed was hammered by loneliness in the palace. Neither chose the fire chose them. Mehmed's fire was not fed by warmth, but by the cold soot of the foundry and the bitter ink of forbidden scrolls. While other princes hunted for sport, he hunted the secrets of the great bombard. He spent his adolescence not in the sun, but in the shadows of master founders, learning how bronze behaves under extreme heat, understanding that an empire is only as strong as the metal it can forge. He didn't just study history. He performed autopsies on the failures of every crusade that had ever broken against the Theodosian walls. He knew the precise density of the stone, the chemical weakness of the mortar, and the exact weight of a cannonball required to crack 1,000 years of stubborn tradition. Simultaneously, in the dense forests of Japan, Musashi was performing an anatomy of fear. He realized that a duel is won in the microscopic breath before the sword is even touched. Musashi whispered to the silence, "To win, you must make the enemy see his own death before it arrives." He lived in the dirt, his skin turning to leather, his eyes sharpening into glass. He didn't just fight men, he fought the very concept of hesitation. Both were forging themselves into weapons that the world hadn't seen yet. One was a needle of absolute precision. The other was a crushing mountain of iron. They didn't seek to join the world. They sought to dismantle it and rebuild it in their image. Consider the silence of the forge versus the scream of the battlefield. Young Mehmed knew that a crown is just a target unless it is backed by the coldest logic. He studied the fall of Troy and the rise of Alexander not as bedtime stories, but as technical manuals. He was obsessed with the breach. He realized that every defense has a frequency, a vibration that, when hit correctly, causes the entire structure to shatter. He was searching for the frequency of Rome. Meanwhile, Musashi was discovering that the greatest enemy isn't the man across from you, but the ghost within you. Musashi once said, "You can only fight the way you practice." So he practiced dying every single morning. By the time he reached the forest of his duels, he was already a corpse walking, and you cannot kill what is already dead. This is the ultimate paradox of the warrior. To become invincible, you must first become nothing. Mehmed became the state. Musashi became the void. Both surrendered their humanity to become legends. Will and cut. A true warrior constructs victory in his mind before stepping onto the battlefield. Musashi had already killed Kojiro before he ever reached Ganru Island. He carved Kojiro's patience by arriving late and carved his pride with a wooden awe. Strategy's not a trick. It is the demolition of the opponent's mental architecture. In the spring of 1453, before the walls of Constantinople, Mehmed played the greatest engineering gamble in history. The Shahi cannons were not just cast iron. They were physical evidence hurled at those who said impossible. Those walls were deemed indestructible. But Mehmed wasn't looking at the stones. He was looking at the fear behind them. The city was besieged, but the true siege began when Mehmed destroyed his own comfort zone. 53 days without sleep. Plans, revisions, and absolute conviction. Will is a battering ram used to breach physical obstacles. Mehmed held that ram with his own hands. Consider the brutal logistics of obsession. Mehmed didn't just order the cannons. He lived in the foundries. He watched the liquid sun of molten bronze pour into the earth, knowing that if the cooling process flickered by a fraction, his vision of a new world would explode in his face. He was the chief architect of his own destruction and rebirth. He calculated the vibration of the ground when the Shahi fired, adjusting the trajectory with a compass while his generals trembled at the thunder that shook the very foundations of the earth. He was not just a commander. He was the primary source of the siege's energy. Musashi's architecture was built on a different kind of rigidity, the fortress of total solitude. He practiced the longsword until his muscles forgot the meaning of fatigue, reaching a state where the blade was no longer an object, but an extra limb of his will. He didn't seek balance. He sought supremacy. When he stood before his opponents, he wasn't just a man. He was a mathematical inevitability. He knew the exact distance to the inch where an enemy's strike transitions from a threat to a suicide. This is not talent. This is the lethal geometry of a mind that has systematically murdered its own capacity for failure. They both understood that walls, whether made of stone or fear, are only as strong as the person who believes in them. Let's deconstruct the moment of impact. When the first 600-kilogram stone hit the walls of Constantinople, it didn't just break rock. It broke the psychological certainty of the Christian world. Mehmed stood on a hill watching the dust rise, and he didn't cheer. He calibrated. He was looking for the flaw in the debris. He was a master of the long game. He knew that victory is a slow-motion collapse of the enemy's spirit. Musashi applied this same long game to his stance. He didn't just swing a sword. He manipulated time. He understood that a duel is a conversation where the last one to speak wins. Musashi warned, in a fight, there is no such thing as a second place. He stripped away all the decorative flourishes of traditional swordsmanship. No style, no school, just the brutal efficiency of the cut. If your movement doesn't end in blood, it is a waste of energy. Mehmed stripped away the diplomacy of the old world. Musashi stripped away the ego of the warrior. They reached the same destination through different paths. Absolute functionality, will and cut. Now, look at yourself. You are wandering through the graveyard of your own life, surrounded by projects labeled, "I'll do it tomorrow." You are a slave to the snooze button on your alarm. Musashi refused to spend time on basic grooming because every second of vanity was a second stolen from the blade. Mehmed ended an era at 21 while you scream burnout after a 40-hour work week. Your decay begins in comfort. For Musashi and Mehmed, rest was merely an ambush for the next move. Every time you say "I'm tired," you are sanctifying your lack of discipline. Mehmed's sleeplessness produced more than your entire career ever will. For them, there was no work-life balance nonsense. There was only duty and absolute execution. Either close this video and return to your warm bed to die as a statistic, or accept this reality as a blow to the face and break your chains. Nature does not weed out the weak. It weeds out the undisciplined. Let's perform a clinical audit of your pathetic excuses. You claim you want greatness, yet you spend 4 hours a day scrolling through the digital highlight reels of people who actually bled for their position. You are a professional consumer of inspiration and a ghost in the world of execution. You talk about waiting for the right moment. There is no right moment. There is only the moment you seize and the moment you lose. Mehmed used his nights to memorize the shifting tides of the Dardanelles. You use yours to numb your brain with the blue light of cheap dopamine. Musashi famously said, "Do nothing, which is of no use." Apply that filter to your current existence. Your midday breaks? Useless. Your complaints about the system? Useless. Your paralyzing fear of what your mediocre peers might think of you? The most useless of all. You were worried about your social standing while Mehmed was worried about the precise cooling rate of a 15-ton cannon. You are negotiating with your comfort, hoping that success will accidentally stumble into your lap while you sleep. It won't. Success is a cold-blooded predator that only respects a bigger, more disciplined predator. If you're not the hunter, you are the meal. This is the only law that has never changed in 10,000 years of human conflict. Will and cut. The massive iron chain across the Golden Horn, the Byzantine. Emperor and the Genoese admirals ate their dinners in safety because ships cannot walk on land. This is the ultimate trap of conventional logic. On the night of April 22nd, Mehmed ghosted logic itself. As 67 ships glided through the forests over greased logs, he bypassed more than just physics. He bypassed the limits of the human mind. When the sun rose, the Byzantine soldiers saw the Ottoman fleet floating in the Golden Horn and thought they were facing ghosts. This is strategic ghosting. This is Musashi's mission, or no mine. Destroy expectations, become unpredictable, and strike where the enemy feels safest. By moving ships over mountains, Mehmed erased the word impossible from the enemy's mind. If you play by the rules, you are just a victim waiting for someone better. If you ignore the rules, you create a new universe. Visualize the psychological weight of that impossible night in April. Thousands of men, hundreds of straining oxen, and the absolute silence of a graveyard. Mehmed ordered the oars of the ships to be greased with animal fat so they wouldn't creak against the wood. He ordered the men to move like shadows, their breaths held as the massive galleys climbed the hills of Galata. This wasn't a transport mission. It was a ritual of the impossible. He was literally dragging the sea over the mountains. This is the void in physical form. While the Byzantines stared at the iron chain in the water, guarding a door that was already irrelevant, a phantom navy was moving through the trees behind them. Musashi's concept of coup, or the void, is precisely this: being everywhere and nowhere at once. When you detach yourself from standard procedures, you become a ghost that can walk through walls. The enemy spends his energy fighting the air while you are already standing at his throat. Mehmed didn't ask the terrain for permission. He forced the earth to obey his vision. That is the definition of a master. He does not react to reality. He dictates it. If the path is blocked, he becomes the path. On one hand, Mehmed, who bent nature to walk ships over mountains. On the other, Musashi, who danced with death in 60 duels, whose will struck a heavier blow to reality. The absolute vision of the emperor, or the void philosophy of the Ronin? State your side below like a member of this tribe. Will and cut. When Mehmed the Conqueror died on the road to a new campaign in 1481, he left behind more than conquered lands. He left the canonym, the foundation of modern law and science. Musashi, coughing blood in the Rigondo cave, wrote the Dakoto, the constitution for those who walk alone. One systematized an empire. The other encoded the soul of a warrior. Both whisper the same truth. The individual is the only meaningful unit of power in the universe. Public opinion, social media likes, and what people think of you are just noise. The blade is in your hand. The map is on your desk. You have been given the blueprint. Now you must provide the steel. Legacy is not a monument of stone. It is a virus of the mind. Mehmed's code didn't just manage laws. It restructured the psychology of a global superpower for 5 centuries. He turned a crumbling city into the pulsating heart of the world. Musashi's Book of 5 Rings didn't just teach sword techniques. It taught the strategy of existence itself. They both understood that a life without a grand objective is just a slow, noisy death. Both men died at their posts. Mehmed was heading toward a new conquest in the West, his body ravaged by illness, but his mind already calculating the siege of Rome. Musashi was finishing his final scrolls in a cave, his lungs burning, his grip on the brush never wavering even as his pulse slowed. They didn't seek a peaceful end. They sought a completed mission. They emptied every drop of their spirit into the vessel of history until there was nothing left but the cold steel of their ideas. If you are waiting for a sign to start, look at your hands. If they aren't working, they are rotting. Don't look for meaning in the sky. Find the iron in your blood and execute. Those with the courage to be part of this community, those who walk this dark path with us, have already struck their seal. If you have that iron in you, you are here. If you have made it this far and are ready to write your own destiny, comment "Conquest" in all caps and seal your oath. Who do you want to see next to Musashi in the next episode? A genius who ruled from the shadows, or another conqueror who set thrones on fire? Leave a name below. Will and cut. Execute.